in my own experience of my father serving as a first responder, I noticed that sometimes when he came home, there's a little bit of irritability that was there sometimes, depending on, his lack of sleep or the stress that he was under. Can you give me your take on the cumulative stress, the sleep deprivation, irritability, and how that can, quietly change you and your relationship with those in your home?
So it's different amongst the different folks in public safety. So a police officer will face something a little differently than a firefighter, than an EMS responder that's out there, riding in a box all day long. So probably the one that has the biggest capability of trying to diffuse some of that are firefighters, because of the family type relationship that they have in the station. When they go on a call, they go on a call as a team. They deal with it as a team. They come back to the station as a team, and in many cases, they have the ability, whether they do it or not, to sit and talk about that and kind of have their own defusing kind of situation at the station, depending on what they've seen. As we talked about in an earlier video, people in public safety see things that no one should see. I was 18 years old working in northern Michigan on an ambulance service, and I ended up with a gentleman that was working on a high-pressure gas well in an excavation in a field, and the valve failed and broke off and hit him under the chin and decapitated him. His head flew like 40 feet off into the field, and I got the dubious honor of going over and wrapping it in a sheet and picking it up and carrying it back to the ambulance to put it in the ambulance so we could take his body to the funeral home at 18 years old. I won't go into great detail, but that can be a little bit life-altering. So the ability, and again, the culture is changing, so we don't have the old eggs like me that are gruff and grumpy and, just youngster, just sit down, and if you can't take it, there's the door concept. We're moving beyond that. I think we've done a good job of that. There are still some agencies I'm aware of that are still resistant to acknowledge that what you see impacts your life. But for most part, fire service is getting better with that. What I personally think is a disservice to the firefighters is when they get off their shift at the fire station to either go to another shift at another fire station or some other job that is so involved because they're worried about finances and what they get in the way of salary that they don't have downtime. Having time with your family, having ability to get decent sleep, because all kinds of studies show that when you're sleeping in a fire station, you're not really getting deep sleep because of the interruptions, even if you don't have one. When you walk into that station, it changes your whole metabolic capacity. When I was working as a deputy sheriff, I ended up having what's called a Holter monitor, which monitors you for a period of time, and I had to wear it while I was working. So while my pulse rate at home was in the low 60s, the minute I walked into the briefing room, my pulse was over 80. I had a couple of emergency responses that I went to during the shift. My pulse went up into the 150s. So there is a factor of those jobs that impacts your life, whether you realize it or not, with that adrenaline and the stressors. And so, interrupted sleep is one of those issues. So the fire side, they already have a way to help defer that is by working and talking as a group. EMS, you're paired with a partner. A lot of these folks get slammed call after call after call after call. A lot of the calls are calls they shouldn't even have to go on. They're not a medical emergency, but because of our system that's never been fixed, they still do. The sad side about EMS, and I started in EMS in 1973, it's never really been part of the system. It's always been that odd man out. It's either a volunteer service or it's a third service or it's a commercial service or maybe it's a fire-based EMS, but they're still many times not viewed the same as a firefighter. And if it is if firefighters rotate through, they want to get off that box as quick as they can and do something else. So there's a stressor there of just the continuation, the burnout of, having to go wait in an ER with somebody that really isn't sick for an hour while they're trying to get back into the street and take their call volume. So that's a different problem. And then law enforcement, they work by themselves. So you don't have that capability to talk. And again, cops tend to be a little bit more macho about things, and they have their own self-imposed limits. Again, while I was working the street back in the 70s, long before we had any concern of mental health, long before we knew what the term burnout was, I knew what burnout was because on a Sunday morning, I'm sitting in the back of a cemetery because I don't want anybody to bother me. And I recall when the tones went out, physically reacting to that, going, using a expletive that I knew I was going on a call. That for a period of time, I wasn't in a good mindset to do that. Got through that, but it taught me a lot, and we've come a long way over the years. But all of those have their own stressors in their own ways. But, if you have a family, if you have a spouse that you can talk to, I'm not saying you have to give them every graphic detail of what you just saw, but if they know that something happened and that might be why you're tense or sad or whatever, that can help. When you go on a SIDS death and you just had a cardiac arrest on a 6-month-old child, that's not a positive thing.
Technology today, it's definitely moving in the right direction. At one of our local stations here, when tones fall, they have different tones for different rooms to try to help the men and women sleep a little bit more. So it's coming. It's not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. So hopefully that'll help out. And then with my own personal experience, my father's regular routine was to leave the fire station and go right to the police department. We never even saw him. So that happened for years and years and years. And so the irritability, it makes sense now. I see it looking back in retrospect, but being able to do something about it. And obviously, your spouse may never fully, understand what you've seen that day, but just to let them know that just to communicate that, it was a rough night. So they'll extend a little bit more grace in that area. But seeing a professional, how valuable do you think that is to actually help you and do that cup a little bit with someone who can relate?
Well, I'm a firm believer that you don't wait until you have a crisis to go talk to somebody. One of the things that we faced when we were first trying to start a mental health program is most of the clinicians didn't understand first responder issues. If I went in and told my story to some of these people, they'd be going into therapy the next day trying to figure out how to process what I just told them that I saw. So having a clinician that understands, and locally in the Montgomery County area, we do have that. And I think that that's beneficial. And hopefully your agency has a program so that you can anonymously go in and talk. And I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but every once in a while, even when things are good, it's just great to talk and get some of that stuff off your chest.
And that irritability, that's just something that's going to keep compounding possibly and turn into something worse down the road. So having the resources now to do something about it now before it gets completely out of control and now you're divorced and something worse could even happen. We have resources available, and we hope that those that are watching this will take advantage of those resources and get some help.
Yep.